illegal Jewish settlers to the occupied Palestinian territories. 17 years later, namely now, there are 500,000 illegal Jewish settlers in the occupied Palestinian territories. The number has doubled. Israel has now annexed 43% of the West Bank for the settlements. And so, if you look at outcomes and results, the rational person concludes there hasn't been a peace process, there's been an annexationist process, an annexation process. That's the proper description of what's been happening based on results. And in fact, the annexation process, it needs the peace process. It uses the peace process as the facade for the annexation process. What does that mean? Well, everybody in the room knows. Every time Israel is called to account for its settlement expansion, what does it say? It has to be resolved in the peace process. And so they prolong the peace process in order to facilitate the annexation process. So it's unlikely, not only unlikely, it's virtually impossible that anything will come of the peace process. Well, what about the most recent developments in the Arab world? Here, it's much too soon to tell the outcome of the revolts in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Bahrain. It's too soon to tell, so I don't think it's useful to speculate. But there is one, I think, question worth pondering. Why is Israel in such dread of these revolts in the Arab world? Why are they in such dread of these attempts to democratize the various countries in the Arab world? Israel likes to say it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And judging by its reaction to what's going on here, you would think they want to make sure they're the only democracy in the Middle East. And so the question is why? As everyone recalls, memories haven't yet faded, I don't think. The United States, until the very last minute, did what it could to keep Mr. Mubarak. Someone like Ataturk in Egypt, he gave an interview last week, and he said, we are not going to stand by if Israel attacks Gaza again. And earlier he said that the Egyptian blockade of Gaza is a black stain on the Arab world. It's a different country, or it can be, if the revolts succeed in bringing to power representative governments. And that's Israel's fear, that it won't be able to carry on any longer.
You're not going to mention the fear of the Muslim Brotherhood.
It won't be able to carry on any longer in a reckless and ruthless fashion. A few months ago, this fellow at the Hezbollah, he gave a speech, and he said, you know, these Israelis, they're very open about what they're going to do. They never hide anything. He said, all you have to do to know what Israel is going to do next week, or what it's going to do next month, he said, all you have to do is open up the newspapers. It's right there. And then he asked the obvious question. He said, why do they put everything in the papers in the open? And his answer was, because Arabs don't read. They don't read. He said, but there's one difference. He says, Hezbollah, we read. And it was striking to me because he gave the speech on a Sunday. And on the Tuesday before, President Bush had just released his memoir. And about 6 months before, Tony Blair had released his memoir. And I was reading Mr. Nasrallah's speech, and he not only cited passages from Blair's memoir, he was citing passages from Bush's memoir, which had come out 5 days before. Now, knowing my ex-president as I do, that would mean that Mr. Nasrallah read Bush's memoir before Bush did. And Israel doesn't like that. Israel doesn't like that. It likes people like Mr. Mubarak. The only book he ever read was The Complete Guide to Chewing Grass. They like King Abdullah of Jordan. The only book he ever read was The Child's Instructions for PlayStation Computer Games. And Saudi Arabia, read, let's not even go there. That's what they want. They don't want Mr. Al-Baradei, a physicist, the former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the head who said the U.S. had no right, at the time he was the head of the IAEA, the U.S. had no right to invade Iraq. There was no evidence of weapons of mass destruction. And for the past few months he's been saying again, there's no evidence or grounds for invading Iran. And he said, we're going to lift the blockade of Gaza. And we're not going to sit idly by if you attack Gaza again. They don't like that type. They don't like that type. And that's the problem for them. Now, you can imagine that they, the Americans, the Saudis, Israel's main, the U.S. and Israel's main democratic ally in the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, they're working behind the scenes to try to abort or limit the effects of the revolts, and we don't know, they may succeed. I've been involved in this now for some 30 years. It's a very sobering thought. I first became involved in June 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, and my entire adult life has passed. And it's, as I say, sobering. There's this huge breadth and depth of human knowledge, some of which I sampled when I was in my high school years, in my college years. And I discovered 30 years had passed, and I devoted myself to learning every period, every comma,